Welcome back to the Swig Spot. I'm Swigsy, and today we're going to talk about Arcane. Now, I'm of the opinion that Arcane is criminally underrated. Released in November of 2021, Arcane is Netflix's adaptation of the video game League of Legends. Now, there are two things I want to get straight right out of the gate, okay? The first is you don't need to know anything about League of Legends to enjoy this show. I didn't have a single clue about anything related to League of Legends, and I still had a blast. The second is, don't let the medium confuse you, okay? This is an animated show, but by no means is this a children's show, okay? This deals with really complex themes. There's a lot of violence, there's some language, so definitely not a kid's show. Definitely meant for a more mature audience. Going back to League of Legends, even though I didn't know anything about League of Legends and still had a blast, my general understanding is if you do know a lot about League of Legends, maybe you've played it, maybe you've gotten into the lore, my understanding is you'll still have a great time. Generally speaking, the show stays true to the overall lore of League of Legends and even expands upon it in some cases. It's hard to provide a true synopsis for Arcane without divulging too many spoilers. Suffice it to say that Arcane follows two contrasting settings: the City of Progress, Piltover, and its antithetical undercity, Zaun. When scientific study reaches new heights and allows for the possibility to control magic, tensions rise as the scales that once held the delicate balance of Piltover and Zaun begin to tip. Amidst the chaos, two sisters, Violet and Powder, find themselves trapped amongst the conflict. Arcane explores some really deep themes, like I said earlier. Some of these are family dynamics, class inequality, shame and guilt, power and corruption, as well as moral and ethical responsibilities, just to name a few. Getting into the review. Any review of Arcane that doesn't mention the animation should just not be considered valid by default, okay? You guys, I cannot even put into words how amazing the animation is here. I think the best way to illustrate just how on another level this show is in terms of animation would be to highlight its accomplishments at an award show called the Annies, an award show dedicated specifically to animation. Arcane put up a spectacular showing, winning the majority of categories: animated effects, character animation, character design, directing, production design, storyboarding, and writing. Oh, and Ella Purnell won Best Voice Acting for her performance as Jinx. Out of the 10 categories for an animated TV show, Arcane won 8 of them. If that doesn't convince you to get off your butt and go watch the show right now, I don't know what will. So the animation is good. My all-time favorite thing about the animation in Arcane is very evident within the first 10 minutes or so of the show. And that's that the animation here is given a sense of weight that I haven't seen in other animations. Most animation tends to have a somewhat floaty feel to it, and that isn't inherently a bad thing about the genre, but this sense of weight that isn't typically found gives Arcane a sense of groundedness and an even higher sense of stakes than other animation is able to provide. Now, keep that word in mind. I'm going to come back to that here in a second. This groundedness is accomplished primarily by introducing camera shakes as well as implementing hard-hitting sound editing. One of the most common mistakes that I see in animation is being caught up in the beauty of all of it. Don't get me wrong, I love some pretty animation, okay? Nothing wrong with it. But what sets Arcane apart from the rest of the genre is its dedication to its realism. The shading and character work gives the world a sense of grounding. There's that word again. Arcane feels like a world that's just genuinely lived in. I could see one of the greater criticisms being that Arcane lacks flashy and fast action. This is an area where animation especially shines. But I really appreciate the restraint shown here to not go all out on flashy action sequences. I'm sure they could have, I'm sure they had the talent to do so. But as you may notice, being grounded is a constant theme here for Arcane. Magic is still fairly new to this nation, and we don't explore anything outside of Piltover. I'm sure in future seasons, when Magic takes the wheel and we explore more of the world, We'll see more of that flashy and fast action often expected with an animated series. For now, we get to revel in the brutalism of fistfights, guns, and bombs. This doesn't mean the action is bad, just don't go in expecting unrealistic movement speeds or anything like that. Speaking of action, there is a fight scene that I consider to be one of the most stylistic fight scenes I've ever seen. And if you've seen the show already, you probably know what I'm talking about, and yes, we will talk about it in the spoiler section. Another aspect of the animation that I absolutely love is the lighting and coloring. I love the stark contrast between the bright whites of Piltover and the drab darks of Zaun. The colors associated with both Piltover and Zaun serve to further accentuate the conflicting nature of the two. Piltover is highlighted with pretty blues, which give off a feeling of freedom and curiosity. Zaun, on the other hand, often has an underlying green tone, giving an implication of sickness or disease. Interestingly, though enough, blue often symbolizes power, stability, and trust, all of which are attributes that Piltover boasts of having, whereas green symbolizes greed, jealousy, and envy, all attributed to being characteristics of Zaun. And if you want to go one level deeper, green can also symbolize sustainability and eco-friendliness. And we see green show up later, not associated with Zaun, used kind of in that eco-friendly and sustainability way. What makes it so beautiful and unique is that Arcane is full of neutrals. This creates the opportunity for characters, settings, themes, even symbols to really shine and take the stage through color. Arcane has some of the best animation I have ever seen, and I would easily recommend it just based off that fact alone. But wait, we're not done yet. I want to talk about a few more things. While two sisters, Violet and Powder, are ultimately the show's main protagonists, Jace, Victor, and Mel Medarda all have just as influential and prominent parts. It's rare to find a show devoted to such detailed character development in a couple characters, but we get it in so many here in Arcane. This is a show where even the side characters could easily be categorized as main characters. Caitlyn, Heimerdinger, and Silco all have amazing development that gives us true insights on how they think and their true motivations. More to come on the characters in the spoiler portion of the review. What makes this even more impressive is that they do this in just 9 40-minute episodes. Every other project that I've seen that has this level of character dedication requires a long-standing series to completely flesh out each character. Arcane accomplishes both quality and quantity in a fraction of that time. This is in part due to the format of the story, which I found to be really unique. The show, at 9 episodes long, takes us through our first 3 episodes and then a time jump. Comparable series typically either devote 20 minutes to some background info or an entire series to lay the groundwork before a time jump. This model of using a third of the show was honestly brilliant. It set up the stakes for the rest of the season, but beyond that, our characters are now living with the consequences, both good and bad, of that first pseudo-prequel portion. One of the reasons I love this approach so much was because we got 2 self-contained stories in a single season. This isn't just 3 episodes of preliminary info dumping. These episodes have an introduction, a rising action, and a climax. So that leaves our overall season with a really unique layout. We don't have a traditional 3-act structure, but it's also not a true 2-act structure either. Rather, we have 2 3-act structures? I think I'll start calling it the 1-2-3. 1 season, 2 arcs, 3 acts each. The show's score and soundtrack isn't anything overly special, but I think that could be a good thing. With Arcane's bold use of color and playful artistic style, I think a simpler score works beautifully for it. This allows the animation and story to take front and center stage. Some people argue that the insertion of popular artists singing popish songs pulls you out and tends to be distracting. I don't actually agree with this notion, however, at all. I really think the modern songs sprinkled throughout are really nice. I think each one fits the tone and the scene that it accompanies really well. Even more, I think it fits well with the themes that Zaun and Piltover represent. the misfits versus the traditionalists. Now, we're going to start diving into spoilers here, so if you're wanting to avoid them, now is your warning. Okay, I mean it. So skip ahead to the rating portion of the video for my summary and rating of the show. You've got 5 seconds. I mean, seriously, get out of here. 5, 4, 3, are you still here? 1. All right, now that it's just us, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Let's start with some of my favorite things, and of course, let's start big with the showstopper herself, Jinx. One of my favorite things about Jinx is that at her core, she doesn't really change in the time jump, despite what she wants people to believe. As Powder, she was a timid girl, looking to prove herself and always looking to Violet for validation. When we see her as Jinx, her need for validation hasn't necessarily just disappeared. Instead, she gets her validation from a different source, Silco, and just has others believe that she doesn't need that validation. I think many shows would take the opportunity in a big time jump to turn Jinx into a big, confident antagonist that doesn't need anyone anymore. I absolutely love that she still has her same vulnerabilities that we saw her with as a kid. She just hides them better now. She comes off as confident, but we know better. By the final episode, we see Jinx evolve, which is what makes her development worthwhile. We see her realize that she doesn't need Silco's validation anymore. She doesn't even want it, or anyone's for that matter. It doesn't happen off screen. We see it. Very smart of the writers. Another thing that we see Jinx really struggle with is watching her struggle with the weight and guilt of Milo and Plager's deaths. Not only has she made life-size dolls of them, she frequently hallucinates that they're talking to her. Visually, I think that this is done spectacularly well. The flashes of hallucinations give off kind of this Joker-esque vibe. With Jinx's mental health visually crumbling, it's easy to understand how much she needs someone to be there for her, and how the jealousy could start to creep in when she starts to see Vi and Caitlyn running around together. Speaking of Jinx, let's talk about that fight scene, shall we? When Echo and Jinx come face to face with one another on that bridge, tensions are at an all-time high. But they're quickly broken down as Echo offers a playful gesture, dropping his stopwatch and swinging it back and forth. The lighting here is striking. The lights flickering show his swings aren't timed perfectly or symmetrical. Then we get a glimpse from the other direction. We see Jinx as a little girl again. Then we see the fight play out in a very stylistic fashion, with lots of colors going on and animals that represent each person, paintballs when they're kids, real bullets when they're adults. Obviously, it shows that Jinx and Echo played some sort of this game when they were kids, with Echo trying to reach Jinx before she could hit him with paintballs. What I love even more is that in dropping his stopwatch in the fashion that he does, Echo signifies to Jinx exactly how he wants this fight to play out. Out of respect for one another, their old friendship, they non-verbally agreed to some ground rules for this fight. In the background, we start hearing some ticking. This isn't going to be a fight, this is a race. Our first run through of the fight shows Echo having been hit with a paintball, losing the race as a young boy. We then rewind and play through the race again, this time grounded in what really happens. And here, Echo wins, closing the gap and getting a hit on Jinx. What I love about this fight is that it's something only animation can do. If you tried to do this same sequence in a live action, it would be tacky, confusing, and just flat out weird. Here it feels natural, very creative, and stylistic. The music here is amazing. It fits the scene so well. I think this scene could have been a little more impactful if we'd maybe seen Echo and Jinx play this game maybe just once when they were kids. Then the fight would have been calling back to that moment when they were kids. But I also understand that then the flashes back between being an adult and kids during the fight would have been a little bit redundant. I get that it's a delicate balance, and overall I enjoy how it currently is, because it doesn't waste our time on unnecessary info earlier on, and rather we just get that info that we need from those short sequences and flashbacks in the fight itself. What impressed me about the world and the lore of Arcane is that just like Other aspects of the show, it feels real and lived in. One of the main themes of the show is moral ambiguity. What is right? What is an overstepping of boundaries? Is it really corruption if it's for the benefit of others? This theme comes about because of the complexity of the world and the characters in it. A common pitfall in any form of storytelling is only accounting for the good guys versus the bad guys. But that's not how the real world works, is it? In Arcane, while we still have the overarching good guys versus bad guys, it's a lot more ambiguous and variable. Rather than Piltover versus Zaun, we have different organizations, and individuals within those organizations with their own agendas. It's not simply Silco versus the Piltover Council. We also have the Firelights, the Chem Barons, Hextech, Silco's crew, the Piltover Police. Within each of these organizations, there are individuals with their own motivations. The relationship between Jace and Mel primarily stems because Mel sees an opportunity to gain power on the council by backing Jace in his studies. Marcus ultimately just wants his daughter to be safe. Caitlyn wants to prove herself and prove the conspiracy that Silco's behind everything. There's many more examples, but these lead to people and organizations interacting in unique ways, providing for twists and turns throughout the story. Now, I'd like to touch on some things that I think could have used a little bit of tweaking. I don't have any major issues with the show, but there are some small things that upon reflection I think could have used some more time. Silco. I actually love Silco's design, his voice acting, and his personality. But as far as a villain goes, I thought he was pretty standard. I think this lends itself nicely to the narrative and allows other characters to be more ambiguous than they could otherwise, but I found his motivations to be a bit generic. For a show of this caliber, it's surprising that the main antagonist was kind of meh. What could have made it a bit more enticing would have been that if Shimmer would have actually healed and helped residents of Zaun, but then had some side effects Silco had known about all along, but never disclosed. Then I think his argument about separating Zaun from Piltover would have held a lot more weight, and we would have seen more people turn from the Piltover Council and start flocking to Zaun. I'm sure this probably doesn't fit into any League of Legends lore whatsoever, but I think it would have made Silco a bit more dynamic and even more cynical. Some of the elements attached with the magic and Hextech I think could have been explained a bit more as well. More specifically, I'm referring to what Victor is going through toward the end of the season. I understand the why of Victor looking for a cure, but the what and how of what is actually happening to his body doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's not really ever explained. I'd like to think that this is intentional, and it will be explained a lot more in Season 2, but as it currently stands, I found it somewhat confusing beyond the basics of just something unnatural is happening to Victor, and it's due to the Hex Core and the Shimmer in his body. Lastly, by the end of the season, there's heavy implication that Vi and Caitlyn are going to have a romantic involvement moving forward. My only hesitation here is that at this point it doesn't really seem earned. Because we have so many other characters and relationships that we're focusing on in this show, I don't really feel the chemistry here between these two. I'm sure in Season 2 this relationship will take a front seat, but I kept feeling like in this season they were forcing moments between these two rather than letting them happen organically. Overall, both with Victor's connection to the Hex Core and the Vi and Caitlyn relationship, I think this season could have benefited from just one more episode. That would have allowed for some more explanation on the Hex Core's effect of Victor, as well as allow for some slower moments between Vi and Caitlyn to actually bond with one another and create, that groundwork that's necessary for every relationship. Ultimately, these are somewhat nitpicky points that I know aren't supposed to be completely fleshed out. I understand that there's still moving parts and will likely play a huge role in Season 2. Now, before I get into the rating, I want to highlight and recap what I would consider the strengths and weaknesses of the show. The major strengths are obviously the animation first. The animation is awe-inspiring. The characters and character development are amazing. The exploration of mature and complex themes, as well as the story structure. Finally, the realism contained in this show is beyond my comprehension. The fact that they were able to keep the realism and groundedness in a show about magic is just extremely impressive. The goods are, this show has just the right amount of humor. The soundtrack is fun and it fits well, and the pacing is good. As far as weaknesses go, I have to be pretty nitpicky to find some. The magic, I think, isn't explained super well, and there's still not a great understanding of it. I realize that this could be intentional, but I hope it doesn't hinder the story in the future. There is a relationship that, just due to the large cast and all the other relationships in the series, it kind of takes more of a backseat than I think is originally intended. In terms of rating, on an enjoyment scale, I would give this show a 9 out of 10. Why isn't it a 10 out of 10, you might ask? You've been raving about it this whole time, Swigsy. Honestly, a lot of the things I absolutely love about this show is what holds it back. The deep and heavy themes it tackles means that this show brings a heavier mood. You're not going to want to throw it on every single day kind of thing. On a quality scale, I gave Arcane a 9.5 out of 10. This is a wonderfully fantastic show, and I would even consider it magical, or even arcane. See what I did there? Due to its beauty and complexity, it's very easy to forget that Arcane is based on a video game, and I highly recommend everyone gives it a watch. If you're hesitant because the show is animated, stop. Don't be that person. In the past few years, some of the very best shows and movies that I've watched have been animated. Arcane obviously among them. This show is amazing because of its animation, not in spite of it. If you made it this far in the video, I want to give you a huge thanks. I spent a lot of time and effort on this video, and it really means a lot to me that you stuck around. If you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. You guys are rock stars. I had a blast making this video. I'll catch you guys in the next one.